St-Pierre is with us. You're the CEO and counter-terrorism advisor for the security consulting firm Mosecon. Thanks for joining us. First of all, I'd like you to address, if you would, for us this evening, what we just heard from the Paris prosecutor, which is that there were accomplices. The killer, the man who was behind the wheel of the truck and drove his truck into the crowd, killing 84 people, did indeed have accomplices. And that really settles the matter a week after the attack of whether he'd been doing this alone or whether there were other people involved.
Well, first of all, good evening. Thank you for having me. Well, the type of planning, I mean, being able to rent a truck, there had already been a few pictures, selfies that have been going around showing that he'd been with other people in the truck. Access to the weapons. You might remember the Armenian couple that's in custody for having provided a weapon. So obviously this is, he definitely went around and asked people for support in doing this. The question, and I believe this is what Prosecutor Molins, referred to as being secret, is to what extent? Does it go beyond the local support of providing weapons or accessories or financial support, or does it extend really to something more operational where an organization like IS, which claimed the attack, really directed the operation?
Right, and we don't have the answer to that yet. So I'd like to ask you to address the wider concern that everybody has in this country, which is what can their government do at this stage to protect us? There has been a string of terror attacks over the last 18 months, including multiple attacks since the government put in place this state of emergency 8 months ago. So in your view, is the government doing enough? Is there anything that could be done that's not being done?
Well, the biggest problem is having to play catch up. If for whatever reasons, resources, finance, personnel, if there's a lack or a certain level of negligence for a few years, and suddenly you have to play catch up because terrorists understand now that France is vulnerable, then it becomes very difficult. I think the first step is to understand that this is actually a generational problem now. We're not talking about 2 or 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. We're actually talking about the full generation, 10, 15, 20 years before it's actually solved. Also, there needs to be an understanding that the solution needs to become multilateral. That means not only it's not just an issue for the military or the police or the politicians now. Everybody in the French society needs to be involved to understand and be able to root out the causes of terrorism. On the other hand, and this relates to the Nice attack.
St-Pierre, when you say everybody needs to be involved, if you're here and you live in France, you're sort of counting on law enforcement, counter-terrorism agencies to protect you. So what do you mean when you say everybody needs to be involved?
I mean by that, for example, involve social workers, involve teachers. What we're seeing very close is the phenomenon that could be related to mass shooters. When that occurred regularly, like in the United States or in Germany in the early 2000s, teachers were involved to try to detect the early signs of potential violence, of potential outbursts, of potential, now in this case, radicalization. So this is what I mean, is that everybody that's in the position of influence in the workplace, in schools, in the education system, in the healthcare system, everybody as a society now needs to become aware of what they can do, because it is a social problem. It's no longer just it's unfortunately become the normal and the new normal. And as such, this is what I mean, is get everybody involved, not just the law enforcement, but everybody that can contribute to mitigating and rooting out the root causes of terrorism.
When you say it's a social problem, you mean it is something that is created by our society? We are creating the kind of young men and women that want to do this? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm saying is basically the conditions are there to create the frustration, to create the rage, that basically these people now only need a nudge to fall into radicalism. If you take, if you want to go back about 10 years, if you take all the frustration and the rage that led to the riots in the banlieue, that rage is still there in many ways. You see it in the most recent riots. And these are factors that come together and form a perfect storm. And so if France wants to heal and France wants to solve that issue of terrorism and limit it and save lives, it needs to work together and be coherent and cohesive as a society to understand that everybody needs to do its part. So it's not just France, it's the Western world as a whole, but we need to understand that, the way we used to do things with only one type of group or only a certain department of the government is responsible, that those days are long gone now.
And just a quick word on the state of emergency. You know, it's wider powers of arrest for police. It's the ability to search cars, which didn't previously exist. The ability to exploit phone and computer data. Is this all? I understand what you're saying. It's not enough, but is that the right thing to do?
Yes and no. I mean, on the one hand, yes, if your law enforcement personnel, if your military personnel is fit, if there's enough of them, absolutely. Then you can really say, okay, well, we need a short-term solution. We need to weed out. We need to work on this. But unfortunately, the reports have been regular that police, that military are overwhelmed. They're exhausted. And I think calling upon reserves is a sign of that. And I think that the appeal for the public to now register and become to be members of the reserve is now also a statement to say, well, we're completely at the end of our rope here. We're exhausted. We need help. So the more powers they get, the more they use. But at the same time, the more exhausted they become because the threat level is very high. And so it needs to be complemented by, obviously, an addition of resources. And by that, I mean not simply money, but personnel as well.
All right, Jan St-Pierre joining us from Berlin, counter-terrorism advisor at Mosecon. Thank you very much indeed.